I owe you the truth. Behind every mark your suffering left on you, every one you have been reading as a witness against you. Each time it catches the light, not evidence of failure, not proof you were forgotten in the exact hour you needed me most, not a witness that your story went wrong and simply stayed that way. A different kind of witness, one I have been keeping, since long before you understood what any of it meant. Before this message ends, I am changing what those marks testify to, right where you are sitting. Stay with me a moment before you decide what those marks prove about you. You have read them as failure for so long. Reading them any other way feels almost disrespectful to what they cost you. I am not asking you to erase the memory attached to any of them. I am asking you to let me stand beside you while you look at it again. This time with someone else's eyes on it besides your own tired ones. Here is something small before we go any further. Let the line across your shoulders settle down by the width of a small coin, not the whole weight, just that much, just for this sentence. Nothing else is required of you yet. Not composure, not the right posture for prayer, not an explanation prepared in advance. Only that small release and me already close enough to notice it happen. Hold on to this one line, because you will need it again before we are finished. The mark is not the wound, it is the witness. I see the woman checking a scar in the mirror every year, translating it into the word ruined instead of the word remained. The man who survived what should have killed him treats his limp like an apology. An apology he owes strangers for taking up space at all. There is a particular kind of counting that happens after loss. Fingers running over old stitches, tracing the outline of a year nobody mentions at the table anymore. A mother examines the marks a hard pregnancy left across her body. She hears only what it cost her, never what it carried through to the end. I missed none of it. A young widow keeps her wedding ring on a chain instead of her finger. She treats the choice like a small betrayal instead of what it actually is, a mark of love that outlived the marriage itself. Someone rebuilding a life after addiction counts the months privately on their fingers, never quite trusting the number enough to say it out loud, where it might get used against them later. A man who lost a business he built from nothing avoids driving past the building. He calls the avoidance weakness, instead of the ordinary cost of loving something that did not survive. The friend who used to ask how you were doing stopped asking somewhere around the second year, assuming silence meant recovery instead of exhaustion. Your own explanation for the mark has gotten shorter with every telling, sanded down until it barely mentions what actually happened to you. A father drives home from a second job, replaying an accident in his memory, the way other men replay a game they lost years ago. Someone in your life has learned to angle a photograph, so the scar stays out of frame. They call that vanity instead of what it actually is. I have watched every version of that careful angling, every cropped picture, every rehearsed sentence built to keep the real one buried underneath it. There is also the quieter kind of mark, the one nobody can photograph at all, the habit that started the year the marriage ended, the nail bitten down to nothing during the months the diagnosis was uncertain, the name you flinch at hearing spoken out loud, in a room full of people who do not know what it cost you to hear it. A woman keeps a due date circled on a calendar nobody else remembers. She treats her own private grief like something too small to mention next to everyone else's louder problems. Not one of these marks shows up in a mirror, and I have overlooked not one of them either. A young man rolls his sleeve back down quickly. When the conversation drifts too close to the year, he almost did not make it. A widow answers the question of how she is doing. with the same 4 words every time. 4 words are all she has agreed to give away in public. A teenager covers an old injury with careful makeup before school, convinced being seen clearly means being seen as broken. Each of them decided on their own, without ever asking me first, exactly what their mark was allowed to mean. A woman adjusts a scarf in a parking lot mirror before walking into a meeting, checking that no one can see what a hard treatment took from her that year. A veteran pauses at the bottom of a set of stairs, recalculating the easiest way up before anyone notices the recalculating happening. Not one of them is broken beyond use. Each has simply learned to manage what a stranger might notice, before that stranger ever gets the chance to react to it. I have been standing closer to those marks than you have let yourself believe, longer than the silence around them has lasted, not because I was waiting for a scar to vanish before I would come near it. I have never once required that of anyone who ever carried one. Somewhere in a sermon, a family gathering, or an offhand comment from someone who never carried a mark of their own, you picked up the idea that a healed life should show no evidence it was ever broken. That idea was never mine. It came from somewhere much smaller than a mountain, far more human than you were led to believe. Maybe it was a testimony night where only the most polished stories drew applause. Yours felt too unfinished to bring anywhere near a microphone. Maybe it was a relative who changed the subject the instant your mark came up, teaching you without a single spoken word that some things simply do not get discussed at a family table. Maybe it was nobody in particular, just years spent watching everyone else's highlight reel. Concluding your own footage must have been shot with a different camera entirely. Those moments were never teaching you something true about me. They were teaching you something true about the people in the room. And you filed it under my name by mistake. The parent in you has been apologizing to a child for a scar that child has never once flinched at. The survivor in you keeps rehearsing an explanation nobody actually asked for, just in case someone eventually does. The version of you that lived through the worst year on record has learned to introduce yourself without mentioning it, as if leaving it out were the same thing as being fully healed from it. That performance was never required in front of me. I did not ask you to arrive polished. I did not ask you to file the mark under a chapter you never revisit. I asked for the version of you that actually exists, the one still carrying it, still unsure exactly what it means, still standing here anyway. Here is where the lie breaks. The version of me you inherited treated every visible mark as unfinished business, evidence I would be embarrassed to let stand in the light, something to be resolved quietly before anyone important noticed it. That version keeps a very tidy office. It prefers stories where the wound closes so completely nobody can even find where it used to be. It hands out forgiveness like a form to fill out. It treats any lingering scar as proof the form was filled out wrong. I do not run that kind of office. I never have. The real shape of things runs in the opposite direction. I keep every mark, every single one. I have never once been ashamed to stand next to one in front of anyone. A witness does not require the story behind it to have been pleasant, fair, or explainable in a single tidy sentence. It only requires that something real happened, that someone survived long enough afterward to tell it honestly. That is the whole qualification, nothing more. Not composure under pressure, not a resolution neat enough for a stage, not proof that the hard season improved you in every visible way. Simply this: it happened, and you are still here, and I was present for the entire length of it, keeping records you were never shown until this exact moment. Think about what a witness actually does in an ordinary courtroom. A witness is not asked whether the events were fair. A witness is not disqualified for having been afraid, injured, or changed by what took place. A witness is called forward for exactly one reason: because they were there, and what they say carries weight. Precisely because they lived through it rather than heard about it secondhand. That is the position I have been putting you in the entire time, not the position of someone permanently damaged and quietly excused from the room. Here is the difference worth keeping. A wound is what happened to you. It is private, it is painful, and it does not ask your permission before it changes how you move through a room. A witness is what happens afterward, what the wound becomes once it stops being only about the damage and starts pointing toward what carried you through it instead. A wound says something broke. A witness says something held. Something held. You have been treating every mark on your story as though it could only ever mean the first thing. I have been reading it as the second thing since the very day it was made. Every tear you assumed disappeared without a trace, reached further than anyone told you it would. It went nowhere unnoticed. I do not lose what falls in front of me. I have never treated a single one of your tears like background noise, waiting for you to compose yourself. Grief that felt wasted was never wasted on me. Never wasted. A cry that felt unheard because no one else happened to be in the room. It was never unheard in the room that actually mattered. You have been counting your tears as loss. I have been counting them as evidence. Proof that something in you kept caring, kept hoping, kept showing up. To a life that had already cost you more than it should have. You have been keeping your own private account of every time you cried, tallying it up as proof of exactly how alone you were in each of those moments. There is an older accounting than yours, kept by a king who once wrote from inside a cave, while men hunted him through the hills, convinced no one important was recording any of what he was going through. He wrote that his tears had already been counted, gathered, and kept somewhere safe, as though sorrow itself were valuable enough to store, rather than simply let drain away unnoticed. That accounting is still open. Every tear you thought evaporated, the moment it fell has already been added to the same ledger, and not one entry in it has ever been marked as wasted. If that description just found you sitting exactly where you are, leave the word witness right here, not as a performance for anyone watching, but as a small admission to yourself that the mark you have been hiding might mean something other than what you decided it meant alone. I have also been changing what you have been wearing over all of it, even when you could not feel the change taking place. The version of you that walked through the worst of it wore something heavy for a long time, a garment stitched from exhaustion, apology, and quiet grief that never got a proper name. I have been trading that out for something else, one thread at a time. So slowly you mistook the exchange for nothing happening at all. There is an old promise about trading ashes for something beautiful, mourning for gladness, and a heavy spirit for a garment that can actually be worn out in public without shame. I have been living that trade out in you in slow motion, the way tailors used to work before machines made everything instant. You have not seen the finished garment yet, but every thread I already pulled out of the old fabric was real, and every thread going back in its place is real too. Even on the days it feels like nothing is changing at all, there is also a heart underneath all of this that I have been working on the same way. The one grown hard from protecting itself. The one that learned to brace before it was even touched. I have not been demanding you soften it by sheer effort. I have been replacing it gently, with something that can actually feel without shattering, and giving you the wisdom to protect that tender new heart without needing to wall it back up the way the old one did. A tender heart is not a careless one. Being open again does not mean handing yourself to the first person who smiles at you, without also asking whether they can be trusted with something this new. This does not mean the pain was good. It does not mean I arranged it as a lesson. You could not have learned any gentler way. I do not build classrooms out of other people's cruelty. I do not schedule tragedy in order to make a point land harder. What I do is refuse to let what was meant to ruin you become the only words spoken over it afterward. The wound stays true to what actually happened. Exactly what happened. The witness is what I have been writing underneath it the entire time. In a hand you could not read yet, because nobody had shown you that a hand like that existed. I want to read you a line from a man who wrote it while he was still recovering from an affliction so heavy. He later admitted he had despaired of life itself. He was certain he would not come out the other side of it. He wrote from a season so crushing. He later confessed in the same letter he had carried what felt like a death sentence inside himself. While it was happening, he did not soften that part for the very congregation that was doubting him. He told them plainly. The weight had gone far beyond anything he could endure on his own strength. It had happened for a reason he could only see afterward. So he would stop relying on his own endurance, holding out, and start relying entirely on the one who raises what looks finished back to life. Think about what it costs a person to admit that kind of collapse in writing, knowing the letter would be read aloud to people already looking for a reason to dismiss him. He did not edit that part out to protect his reputation. He left it in because the mark mattered more to him than the image he could have preserved by hiding it. That is the same posture I am asking you to consider taking with whatever mark you have been managing so carefully. I did not write what came next for scholars comparing translations in a quiet room somewhere. I wrote it for the widow, keeping a second cup out of habit long after she needed to. I wrote it for the parent who still flinches walking past a certain hallway years later. I wrote it for you, checking an old mark in a mirror and deciding once again what it must say about you. I want you to hear the sentence exactly as it was first set down, by that same battered man, not softened, not shortened to fit into something easier to forget by lunchtime. This is what I said. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 22. He has also put his seal on us and given us his Spirit in our hearts as a guarantee. Read that slowly, because every word in it is doing more work than it looks like at first glance. He has put his seal on us. A seal is not a decoration. It is a mark pressed into something to show whose it is, and that it has not been tampered with. That is what your marks have actually been the whole time. Not evidence you were damaged goods, but a seal showing ownership. Proof that nothing suffering did to you was ever able to change whose you remained through it. Notice what the sentence does next. It does not stop at the seal. It moves straight to a guarantee. Something given now as a down payment on something larger still on its way. A guarantee is not the full amount. It is proof the full amount is coming. Signed by someone who has never once failed to deliver on a promise this specific. Your mark is the seal. What is still coming is the guarantee behind it. Already paid in part, already unmistakably yours. Notice, too, the small word sitting just before the seal. Also. He also put his seal on us. Also meaning in addition to something already given. A relationship that already existed, established and settled, before the seal was ever pressed on top of it. The seal was never the first thing. It marked what was already true, instead of creating something out of nothing. Your mark works the same way. It did not make you mine. It arrived on top of a belonging that was already decided, the way a wax seal is pressed into a letter that was already written, sealing a message that had already been settled, long before the wax ever touched the page. Sit with the order of that for a moment, because the order changes how you read your whole story. Belonging came first. Proof came second. You have been living as though it worked the other way around, as though you had to produce enough evidence of recovery before I would claim you, as though the claiming itself were pending review until further notice. Nothing about that was ever true. A child born into a family does not earn the family name. By behaving well through a hard year, the name was there before the first breath, and every document stamped afterward only confirms what the birth had settled. That is why suffering could not unfamily you. Whatever broke you arrived long after the belonging was decided, which means it never held the power to reverse a decision it had no part in making. When you doubt whose you are not questioning open business. You are relitigating a case that was closed before your pain ever entered the courtroom, and closed in your favor, and given us His Spirit in our hearts. Notice it does not say His instructions in your hands, or His rules on a page you carry with you. It says His Spirit in your heart, the same place where every mark you have been hiding actually lives. The seal was never placed only on the outside of your story. The way a stamp gets pressed onto an envelope and forgotten once it has been delivered. It was placed on the inside, in the exact location where the wound sits, so that the place most tempted to call itself ruined is the very place I chose to move into permanently. Here is what makes that promise more than a wish. After I rose from what should have finished me permanently, I did not erase the marks in my own hands and side. I kept them. I let a friend who could not believe I was really alive place his fingers directly against the wound. The mark was the proof, not the embarrassment I needed to hide. I stood in front of people I loved, carrying evidence of the very worst thing that had ever happened to me, and I did not turn it away from the light or hold it behind my back. If I was not ashamed to bring what suffering left on my own body into resurrection, I'm not about to ask you to hide what suffering left on yours. Remember what I owed you at the start of this message. The truth about every mark you have been carrying. Here it is, plain enough to keep. The wound was real. It cost you exactly what it looked like it cost you. But it was never the whole sentence written over your life. The witness is what I have been adding underneath it the entire time. Sealed the same way, guaranteeing the same way, in a hand you had never been shown before today. I am not telling you every mark will disappear by a date you can circle on a calendar, or that the ache behind it stops the moment this message ends. That is not the promise sitting on the table in front of you. The promise was never a schedule for your circumstances. It is what is already true underneath them right now, that you are sealed, that you are not carrying any of this alone, that the worst thing that ever happened to you does not get the final word over who you are becoming next. Anyone offering you a guaranteed timeline for your pain to end by a certain hour is not reading from the same page I just read you. That does not make the waiting comfortable, and I will not pretend it should feel easy simply because it is meaningful. What it does mean is that you are not waiting to find out whether you belong to me. That question was settled the moment the seal was pressed. What you are waiting on now is the full delivery of a promise whose down payment already cleared. So here is something small you can carry into the rest of your week, if you want it. Find one mark, a scar, a memory, a habit that started the year everything fell apart. And instead of covering it or explaining it away, say quietly what it survived instead of only what caused it. Not out loud to anyone else yet, if that still feels like too much to risk. Just to yourself once, honestly. In whatever room you happen to be standing in when you try it. You may not notice anything shift the first time you attempt this, or even the 10th. Somewhere around the 30th quiet, look at that same mark. You may catch yourself reaching for a different word for it without deciding to. Not ruined. Not proof you failed. Evidence instead that you are still here, still standing. Still someone I keep in full view without a trace of hesitation. That is not a fast transformation. It was never designed to be one. It was designed to be true all the way down. However long it takes you to finally believe it without flinching. If you are carrying a heart that has only recently started to soften again, guard that softness the way you would guard something newly planted. Not by building the old wall back up around it, but by giving it time before you hand it to just anyone who happens to smile at you this week. Tenderness is not the same thing as unprotected. You are allowed to let people earn the same trust the mark itself had to earn with you. Slowly. Over time. Through what they actually do, and not only what they say. Take 3 unhurried breaths with me right now, letting each one leave a little slower than it arrived. Not a technique to master by the end of this sentence. Not a performance for anyone keeping time. Just 3 breaths, however uneven, with someone who has never once needed you to breathe correctly before coming close to you. You do not need to explain the whole story to anyone in order for this to count. Someone in your life will eventually notice the difference in how you carry the same mark you used to hide. They will not need the full history to feel it. A friend still bracing for her own worst season may take courage from watching you stop apologizing for yours. A stranger may never know your name and still be steadied by the fact that you did not disappear when your story got hard. None of that requires you to perform recovery. It only requires you to stop covering the seal long enough for someone else to notice it was there. Somewhere ahead of you, there may be exactly one person ready to hear the honest version instead of the edited one. You do not have to find them today, and you do not owe the story to everyone who asks out of curiosity instead of care. But if a name came to mind just now while you read that sentence, treat it as a nudge rather than a coincidence. Telling the truth about a mark to even one trustworthy person tends to loosen something that silence alone never quite manages to loosen by itself. Keep this line, because it is the only one you truly need to carry out of everything else you just read. The mark is not the wound, it is the witness. Every scar you have been hiding, every memory you have been sanding down, every tear you assumed went nowhere, all of it has already been read. All of it has already been sealed. And none of it disqualifies you from a single thing I have ever promised you. You do not have to feel triumphant about any of this today for it to be true. You are allowed to still ache over what caused the mark, while also accepting what I am telling you it has become. Both things can be true in the same sentence, the same year, the same slow unfolding life. The wound was real. The witness is greater. Your tears were not wasted. Your story is not ruined. What suffering marked, mercy has sealed. The guarantee behind it has never once expired. Amen. There is something waiting for you in the pinned comment, a short page written for the next time you catch yourself hiding a mark instead of reading it. If someone came to mind while you were listening, someone carrying a mark of their own they have never once shown you, Let this be the reason you finally send it their way.